Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives and people in my network, colleagues, new colleagues, old colleagues, friends, coworkers, anybody that has a great message to share in terms of the books that have impacted their work, their lives, their businesses, all those worlds intersect. So I want to get to those great leads that can share those books and how those lessons have imprinted themselves on the way they work, the way they carry themselves in life. So for this particular series, I cover three categories of books. The first category is a book that they're sharing with me that I haven't read yet. Second category is a book that we've both read, whether specifically for the episode we're recording or in our past lives. The third category is that of which when I have an author and or publisher that wants to share the message of that book that they've put out there with this audience. So today, my guest, I'm lucky to have author, researcher, speaker Don Schmincke. And Don is the author of the best-selling book, The Code of the Executive, 47 Ancient Samurai Principles Essential for 21st Century Leadership Success. And he's been featured in the Wall Street Journal and USA Today. He's an award-winning speaker, researcher, founder of the Saga Leadership Institute, and delivered over 1,700 speeches. And Don had caught wind of this series, what I was trying to do, what I was trying to share with my audience, what I'm trying to learn from my network and the books that they want to share. Reached out. We went back and forth sharing about our backgrounds, and it made sense to have him as a guest on this series to share about his books. From what he's going to share, you're going to see the experience that he has is rich and deep in the field of leadership, which is my cup of tea and what I enjoy most. So, Don, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me, of course.
So, Don, who are you today? I read the bio, but obviously, can you provide a little more insight into the work that you're doing these days, just to get a sense of what you're putting out there in the world with your clients and the people that you're working with?
Most of my work is research-based, so I spent a lot of time over the past 20 years going around the world, different expeditions, and looking at how humans organize. So we like to teach how to enhance performance and leadership through more biological patterns in their species. So it's been a lot of fun. I've run into some fascinating people and learned a lot. And so it's interesting because for some reason, they want to hang around with me. So we have a chance to share research together. So most of my books and articles are really around that. And what we do a lot is we work with companies directly. So a lot of my time is on the road, flying around, either training CEOs or working with their executive teams.
So when you say expedition, can you give an example of the most recent one that you've undertaken?
Before COVID, actually, that was more of an issue because we had to stop intercountry work. But it was Africa, so which is always a great place to do research in this area.
And then when you talk about the work that you've done with leaders, with CEOs of these companies, what kind of work is that? What kind of work does that entail with them, for them?
Generally, we're brought in to enhance strategic growth and performance. So that could mean to enhance market share, or they want to grow sales at a certain level, or they're trying to pivot because they're being hit by different disruptive effects, or it may be transitional issues where they're either, the older leadership is transitioning out, or they may be up for an M&A sale. And so we try to make sure that works. But it's all around strategic level leadership and focus. So it drives down once we get the strategy issues cleared up, because a lot of strategic planning fails, and our research on the autopsies found out, it's mainly because most strategic plans are tactics, not really strategic. So once we fix that, then we can drive down into culture, structure, leadership style, all those elements.
So when you say that they seem to be tactical instead of strategic, it's more that they're taking the steps without really thinking about the steps that they're taking, essentially?
Well, they're thinking about the steps. The steps aren't necessarily getting them to where they want to step to.
Okay.
It's like when I was working with the Pentagon, a interesting concept was, you could tactically execute very well, but if your strategy is flawed, you're going to lose the war. However, if you got a great strategy, then you can make any number of tactical errors and still pull it off.
Okay. So, Don, just to understand how you ended up here, can you walk me through uh, how you entered into your career? What were those first couple steps when you were going into your education or your career, whatever it might have been? What did that look like when you were stepping into, yeah, the foundation of your career? And then kind
Um,
of walk me through the highlights that got you to what you're doing today.
well, I was dropping out of high school. That was the first step. And I ended up, um, the police said I had to repeat the senior year, and I thought, I am not staying in this place another year. So they gave me 60 days or 90 days or something so it was great. I ended up doing the whole year within that period of time and then got out. So that was the first step. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Eventually I was in a rock band. I was working at my uncle's gas station, and then I noticed people with the fancy cars had a good education. So I went to a community college up the street, and that was interesting for me. I got into the early exposure to computers and electronics, but there was a physics professor who was retired and just teaching for fun, and he came out of MIT, and he and someone else who was out of Cambridge were there, and they said I should apply to MIT. I didn't know what MIT was. I thought it was like a trade school or something. And so I uh, I went through a battery of tests, and I don't know what they saw in me, but I got in, and that's when and that was probably the next step was getting exposed to the early stages of AI, and I ended up focusing on planetary physics. Um, I ended up working on nuclear missile guidance systems at the laboratory up there, and then automated the Harvard MIT biomedical lab. So I have ADHD, so naturally I can do 4 or 5 sciences at one time. And it was when I was working in automating the biomedical lab that I started getting fascinated with humans, and so that led me to Johns Hopkins. So that was the next step where I began studying human grouping behaviors and ended up teaching there. And that's when I got attached to the MBA program and started running into a lot of students who were frustrated executives trying to implement these management theories. So then I began doing research on, is it part of our species? Is it part of our biological evolutionary makeup? And so that was an interesting twist. I wasn't expecting to even get into that realm, but Oxford University gave me a permission to use an ancient manuscript that was written to train leaders 700 years ago. So I wrote the Code of the Executive, and then that took off. Next thing you know, I'm on CNN, I'm on the Wall Street Journal, and now I'm being asked to speak on this ancient work. So I left academia and started funding my own research, and I just kept discovering things around the world, which were a lot of fun. And I started giving a couple thousand speeches and just teaching, because I love to research and teach. So who am I? I think I'm a teacher. That's what I do.
It's amazing to just hear how the first thing you say is, "Well, I dropped out of high school." Not to me that means much or is indicative of anything. It doesn't mean good or bad. It doesn't I don't stop listening at that point because 'cause I've come to understand that, uh, it's not indicative of the person. But it is interesting that you start with that, and then you're like, I was in a rock band, I worked at a gas station, and then following your trajectory and you're getting permission from Oxford to use an ancient manuscript. That's just mind blowing that that's how it's evolved.
Yeah, yeah,
Now,
yeah.
are there specific moments or times and places that stand out that where you just happen to be in the right spot, right time, right moment for these next things to happen, those connection points to where you are now? Like how do you make sense of dropping out and then ending up studying at MIT, teaching or studying also at John Hopkins, teaching, working with Oxford, working with these ancient manuscripts? How do you reconcile all that? Is it your curiosity? Is it just happenstance? Is it just coincidence you're in those right places at the right time? How does that work?
I think the only consistent theme I can think of is that I'm just a chronic learner. And, that's really my passion. I love to learn and love to teach. So at the time, I didn't know that's what I was doing, but I was absorbing information at high rates and trying to discover different things and just getting fascinated with learning. So I think that's the only thing I can think of. The rest was just luck.
Now, did you have that? This sounds like a dumb question, but did you have that passion for learning in high school, but they were just teaching things you weren't interested in?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was interested in learning, but I guess it wasn't going fast enough. I mean, if I did my whole senior year in a couple months, then I guess that would say something. But
Yeah.
I think I was more bored than anything else, and it wasn't until I got into college where you could absorb as much as you want, because you had all the resources there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Don, does it make sense from your childhood that you're doing what you're doing today? Not that the path started a certain way and it makes sense that you ended up here, but I'm always curious about someone's childhood, the way they were as a child, their adolescence, because it seems for me working with leadership coaching clients that so much of their frustration is when they give up, like who they were as a child, their dreams, their wonder, what they were curious about. So I'm always curious about that connection between who somebody is now and who they were in their adolescence. So does it make sense from your adolescence that this is what you're doing now?
No,
And why do you say that?
because I mean,
That's a great answer, by the way. Usually people are like, yeah, thinking back, it does make sense that this is what I'm doing. Why are your thoughts on that no for yourself?
I mean, I was always a voracious learner. I mean, I think I was more challenged in grade school as I was, like I was tracking the Apollo orbits on a globe that I had, at home, and I thought, well, I want to be an astronaut. I mean, so I had these aspirations of doing something interesting, and got fascinated with technology, I guess, at an early age. But it was just childhood whims, and then when I got older, I realized I didn't really enjoy vomiting from my job. So, I don't think I'm gonna go up into space. But,
Yeah.
but yeah, I was always, curious. I think it was curiosity, but that I know, like, someday I'd be training 700 CEOs a year on, how to improve their leadership and their companies. Now that was totally I don't even know what business was about, at the time. In fact, it wasn't until I got to Hopkins that I began looking at how businesses are formed and all those elements. Um, but I didn't know what a balance sheet was. I mean, I knew what a balance scale was in a laboratory, but I didn't know I don't know what a balance sheet was. So is I don't know. It never predicted it.
Done. So what was that moment like or situations like that helped you connect the work you were doing to the boardroom, to the business, to the organization? Was that just random? I mean, how did that happen?
Um, I don't I don't know. I think what happened is when I began looking at industry and then I was working actually in research. I was doing some of the early stage development of CAT scanner design. So, biomedical engineering was the first area when I kind of came out, and then I started observing how people were interacting in a work environment, and the functional and the dysfunctional. So I became fascinated around how humans manage each other, and that sort of helped me when I began teaching at Hopkins, as I was an adjunct faculty there, and it just gave me access to a lot of resources. And then it got more and more fascinating, and that's of course then when Kathy Trower, before she went over to Harvard to take over their governance research, she asked me to teach, and I said, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, just So it took off from there, but it wasn't anything that was linear. It was just exploring and discovering and exploring, and that's why people say, Don, you're just an explorer. I mean, that should
Yeah.
be on your signature page. That's all you do, is just explore. And so I think maybe to think about your question deeper, what was a common theme? I think it was exploring. I mean,
No,
people
I
call
love
me
that.
and then yeah, it's kind of cool. I mean, like I'm like a wannabe Indiana Jones, and so because a lot of the expeditions I do get me into some precarious situations sometimes.
Can you give some examples of those over the years, Don?
Um,
Ones that stand out, ones that maybe you took the most from, ones that turned out completely opposite of what maybe you imagined was going to come out of it? Anything at all?
I guess almost being arrested as a capitalist spy in the Soviet bloc, that was probably one of the early most risky ventures. Being off the transit route and eventually ending up in East Germany, and then getting confronted by Soviet guards as to what am I doing without papers. Yeah, that got interesting. And looking back on that, that was a really stupid thing to do. But it was when the wall was coming down, so I wanted to study how an empire collapses. And you don't get a lot of chances to do that because not a lot are collapsing,
In real time.
every few hundred years, 1,000
Yeah.
years. So yeah, that was fascinating. But it was I learned a lot, and it helped me understand humans and what we're doing, and to see actually a part of the world that was going through an incredible shift, and being able to um, learn from the people that were going through it. And then even today, I mean, sadly, there's issues going on still, and what that might mean. So things like that, or being in the Himalayas and coming across various tribes or communities and seeing how they see the world. And actually, I learned more about how we see our world by seeing how they see our world. And I've always found that interesting too, because I'm thinking like, okay, I know everything, I'm educated, et cetera. And like, sometimes I feel like I don't know shit.
Yeah, like we know everything within our walls, but once you step out of those walls, it's for nothing. It just it doesn't translate automatically.
Yeah, I mean, I remember like being with some Sherpas. We're in a lost civilization area, really deep in the Himalayas, and we were showing them like magazines and pictures of our society, and it was interesting. And we, the technology and our medical care and the space shuttle going up at the time and all of that. And we said, would you want to, come visit or live there or all that? And they said, no. It says you look like you have an interesting city, but you don't look happy.
Yeah.
They were looking at our faces, not at our buildings. And they were right. We look freaking miserable. So the whole point is, why would I want to go somewhere where everybody's miserable?
Yeah. How have conversations like that, contact like that, Don, changed the way that you view, you behave, you live? You don't have to go into a deep dive, but what is when you've had those experiences where people have given you that outside perspective, how do you shift, or how does your living change? What are the subtle changes that may take place in the way you view and you carry yourself when you get back here?
Well, I think it's what normally happens when you have epiphany. It's not something you have to remember. I think it's just a shift in reality where when you come back, you just know it. You just know, yeah, we're pretty unhappy people. and,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
why we buy books on happiness. Not a lot of other places have books on happiness because they don't think about it because they're
That's such a
happy.
good point.
You know, it's like
Such a good point. It's amazing how, scrolling through LinkedIn, going through, I don't know, Harvard Business Review or whatever, or online, just looking through news, how many articles there are for happiness and fulfillment and all that, where, yeah, I can imagine other societies, they're not as focused just because I don't know. It just seems like modern society, obviously the US at the top of that list, is just overcomplicated everything, overcompensated for everything. So we're just on a different level than they are.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of got detached a little bit with all that. I remember when Mother Teresa, when she had come to New York for an operation, I forget what for, and they were asking her when she left, wouldn't you rather move your headquarters here and do your mission here? And her response was, I thought, really telling. She said, "You must be the loneliest people on earth. I cannot wait to get back to Calcutta." I've only been to Calcutta once. It was to refuel a jet, but it's not high on the tourist list. But she
Yeah.
can't wait to get back there. So when I see these things around the world, it just helps me. And sometimes I forget a lot when I'm in the middle of everything going on. But just to step back and say, "Wow, there's a reality that exists that a lot of us aren't exposed to, and from it, what can I learn, and how can that help me in my work and in my teachings?"
Don, what is a question I always ask? I'd be remiss if I didn't. What does leadership mean to you?
I think it means, and this is interesting because we have some more recent research where now I'm having in my program that I think we're teaching leadership all wrong. Because when you look at all these leadership books, we have mostly it's about style of leadership. You'll be a servant leader, you want to be an engaged leader, you want to be a why driven leader, you want to be this kind of leader, that kind of leader. So every year there's a new book on how to be the new leader. And
Yeah, yeah.
And yet when I do autopsies on companies, most dead companies had great leadership books and styles. So it made me question, what the hell are we teaching if we're still dying? It's like, what's going on? In fact, in the opposite end, um, a lot of successful companies had leaders that were assholes and violated all leadership styles. So I'm thinking that's the course we should be teaching. That's the book we should be writing. Is why is it that great leaders with great leadership styles crash a company, but an asshole can dominate the world? And I think we should be teaching that. But out of the research, there was a deeper thing that came out of it. So what um, we're trying to uh, provide the world is a new way of looking at it. And what we invented was this concept that followers don't follow leaders. Let's quit teaching that. Followers aren't following you. They're following the saga you represent, the story you
Mm,
represent. And that explains everything. That explains how great leadership styles can end up, taking a company down. But on the other hand, an idiot, an asshole may be able to create a great company because they created some story for people to follow. So what I try to tell CEOs and any executive is, what's the story you represent? Because the story you represent is probably what they're following. And so I think we're teaching leadership wrong for all those reasons.
yeah, that makes complete sense. Um, yeah, like are they going to rise to the occasion of the story that's being told, or is it just one particular person? Um, yeah, it's kind of surprising that the ones that had the shitty bosses were thriving. And you explain why with the story, but um, yeah, and even though I read all these books on leadership and all these journals and all these studies and whatnot, it's so fluid. I wouldn't claim that you can pinpoint it to one particular thing, but I'm just always curious as to every guest's interpretation of what leadership means, what great leadership means. For you yourself, as you were coming up through your career, what kind of leaders stood out to you?
I don't know. When we when we started formulating these patterns, which were a lot of it was politically incorrect, uh, I got kicked out of a lot of consulting meetings because I was destroying their theories with facts and data. And but what I was simply doing is I was trying to understand the medical evolutionary genetic patterns that represented what allowed leaders like Alexander or Cleopatra or Gandhi or Hannibal or Caesar or Genghis Khan. I mean, what was driving them for market domination, and how did they get the kind of influence they had. And so, and now we know a lot more from what we've done in the biological studies to see, why it did work that way. So we know it works. Now we know more about why and how it works. So that's really it. I was just looking at patterns of leaders throughout thousands of years.
Don, before we jump into the book you wanted to cover for this particular episode, can you just give a brief walkthrough of the Code of the Executive?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that was this manuscript was translated by Dr. Al Sadler, geez, half a century ago or more, and what he did is he ended up he was a great translator of a lot of Asian studies. So I loved his work. So I reinterpreted that for modern management, and it was really around how samurai were trained to be samurai as leaders, not necessarily in terms of battle. It's not like a Sun Tzu's Art of War book. It's really around character. And the first chapter was on death. And I thought, that's interesting. This isn't going to go well. But the first sentence was that, we must keep in mind constantly by day and night the fact that someday we must die. Keep in mind that someday you must die. By day and night, they said, you must do this. And I was curious as to why they taught that. And then I noticed there was a direct connection to bravery and honor. So the book is about that, how they taught that, and what happens when you forget that. But later on, neurologically, we were able to discern that it works because it's unhooking what they call the evil spirit, the selfish part of ourselves. But with later research with Sigmund Freud and understanding the ego, and then even later research with evolutionary psychology, we begin to realize that selfishness is the best strategy for committing genetic warfare. So therefore, it's there for a purpose, and it works. And now we know why the death thing was so important, because if you remember you must die someday, it kind of unhooks the need to commit genetic warfare because you're already dead. So at that point, your ego begins to loosen its grip and you begin to operate with bravery and honor. So it makes sense medically now, whereas before it was more of a philosophy, but it works. And so, yeah, so the book started all that.
Okay. And now we can dive into the book that you wanted to cover. Why don't you introduce the book and how it came to be? What is it that led up to you publishing the book, Don?
Well, I thought it was my coach, Mark Levy. Mark's a great branding coach, and he's actually the one that helped Simon Sinek get to his Start With Why book, because he destroyed Simon's book and picked one chapter. It was called Start With Why, and that was it. So the rest is history. So the guy is that kind of brilliance to him. And he was looking at my work, and I was like, what the heck do I do other than teach? So he started, went through the research, talked to some clients, and he came up with this concept that he said, I think what you're doing is you're teaching winning and losing. And I didn't get what that meant. I was like, it took me like 5 or 6 months. And he said, no, your book should be winners and losers, because you're taking an entirely different approach to winning. And that's what you're teaching CEOs, how to do that. But also part of becoming a great winner is you have to learn how to lose powerfully. And that's where a lot of your research has been in, the study of failed companies and how to turn them around and things like that. So all of a sudden it kind of clicked. And I had been writing a book along this line for the past 6 years, but I didn't know of this context. Once he plugged the context in, then I was like, great. I dusted the old manuscript off and I started, putting it together. So that's where Winners and Losers came from. It was really an experiment I was doing with Mark Levy and his discovery of that. So and I didn't really. It was written for entrepreneurs, which I thought, why. Who needs another entrepreneur book? There's a million copies out there. But then I had several CEOs. Yeah, but there's not a million entrepreneurs. In other words, something's wrong with those books, you know, and everybody's teaching everybody how to win. You got to do this, you got to do that. He says, but you're teaching it in the opposite direction. You're teaching you can't be a great winner until you know how to lose properly. And they were right. I mean, when you look at the biography of the greatest entrepreneurs, their life is not at the end of a series of successes. Their life is at the end of a series of failures.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's what gave birth to the book.
Don, how does that, and the title of the book is Winners and Losers: Entrepreneurial Lessons from 30,000 CEOs on How to Come Out on Top. How does that idea of understanding the losing side, maybe I'm messing this up, but how does that idea of understanding the losing side tied into that samurai messaging or understanding of coming to terms with your mortality?
Yeah. Well, part of it is, and it's interesting you mentioned that because I hadn't thought about the connection with the samurai area, but I know that like an interesting Japanese proverb is like 7 times down, 8 times up. You know, that you keep getting up. And I actually mentioned that in the book because we think that you know, entrepreneurship is just like let's just do everything right because we have all the books around how to do that. But I'm thinking, no, you have to learn how to fall. And the ones that do it well are the ones that win. And the ones that don't do it well are the ones that don't win. But I also caveat that not everyone's supposed to be an entrepreneur.
Hmm.
It's an incredible amount of risk. It's a personality that's not typical. Most people are more sensible. And, you know,
Yeah, they
I,
try to make reason of anything, but I think like the most successful entrepreneurs I know, it's just they don't look for reason. They just get out there and do it.
yeah, yeah. So it really, really is interesting. And people, you know, because I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs say people think I'm crazy, you know, and they like, you know, you're crazy. You're mortgaging your house, you're running up your credit cards on
Yeah.
this idea, and you're risking this and risking that. And you know, they are crazy. In fact, I have a chapter in the book because I stumbled onto this because like I have ADHD, right? And I was doing some research and interviewing some people, and a lot of the doctors who treat ADHD said most of my clients are entrepreneurs. And as I got into it, it was like, now that makes sense because to someone with ADHD, risk doesn't show up the same way as everything as a normal person would see it.
It just doesn't register
Eh,
the same way.
Right. And the mind is working so quickly that the speed of thought is like you're connecting dots that other people aren't connecting. So you kind of see like, well, isn't this obvious? And we're like, we're nuts. No, it's not obvious. And sometimes they're right and we fail, but sometimes it makes sense. It's like, oh wow, how did you figure that out? So the entrepreneurs are a special breed, and I don't think ADHD is a disorder. Now that I've studied it and actually worked it, I think it's really an order. You know, it's almost like a pattern of strength in a way of a particular category of thought, because you're not really attention deficit. You're like attention overwhelmed. Your attention's everywhere, and that's part of the problem. And it really sucks when you try to have relationships.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But when you're
No,
looking at a business model, it's totally an advantage.
no, it's interesting that you bring that up only because my son has ADHD. Um, and yeah, I think maybe because of the time that we're coming up in, it is seen differently where, 10, 15, 20 years ago, even more further back, it was probably seen as, yeah, a deficit. I don't look at it that way just because I
Mhm.
look at him when he's thinking. I look at him when he's got just, yeah, like I'm not worried about him. I just want to make sure that he's tapping into the right things.
Yeah.
But as you speak about it, I was kind of thinking about his experience. um, when were you diagnosed with it, or what's been your experience with it in your career, in your life?
Probably when I was 60 some years old. Yeah, it
Now,
was
now before that, what did you think it was? Did you have a sense for it? Did you think, not what is wrong with me, but why do I feel different? Or is some what was that experience like before you got to that point where you had that diagnosis?
Um, my experience was people were annoyed with me, I mean, like, complained that I couldn't stay focused on something. I had so many ideas and I thought they were all interesting, but it was, criticized. Or I'd be in a meeting and like I had this one girlfriend says, "You're always shaking your leg, really fast when I'm concentrating." I said, "Yeah, it's helping me think better." And so it was annoying. So I guess it was mainly comments about how I was annoying other people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. And it wasn't until I got into it that I began to realize, oh wow, this is a thing, and then when I started getting into it more, I began to realize, oh, it's not only a thing, but I probably could have done the research I've been doing and the connections I've been putting together, bringing the biology and evolution and these ancient societies and modern neurology, put it all together at one time. If I didn't have it, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah, absolutely.
so that's where, and then when I began to look at great artists, great scientists, great CEOs, they were all coming out, saying, it's just, and then I went into the literature and like Harvard Business Review actually had an article on entrepreneurship as disease, they talk about how they actually perform with this thing, and so it was, and John Gartner, a friend of mine, he's actually helped me as a psychotherapist, wrote a book called The Hypomanic Edge, where he actually linked a craziness with success. And he went throughout history to look at this. So we now have all this overwhelming evidence that it's not a disorder, it's probably an order. And maybe, and then my theory is that maybe we need a few people like that in society, because otherwise it's hard to create new civilizations or new sciences or new companies, because you need someone to do that. And I wasn't alone. I went through people that had come out of the closet were like, I don't know, Bill Gates, Walt Disney, Richard Branson, you know, uh, a lot of award-winning actors, a lot of company founders. Yeah, journalist Lisa Ling. We've got founder of Cisco, IKEA. I mean, these people were like, oh, wow. So now I think we're able to see it like, hey, it can be a problem, but it can be a superpower as well. In fact, Forbes in 2014 wrote an article called ADHD, the entrepreneur's superpower, and Huffington Post in 2015 published an article on ADHD can be a CEO's secret superpower. So as we keep going on, I think we're now, I mean, obviously mental health in general is now more accepted as something we can talk about and work with. But I found that when people tell an entrepreneur, like when I hear somebody complain, they think I'm crazy. I'm like, well, you probably are,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
and
it's
so
okay.
and some of those labels, it's like, yeah, you just need a couple great examples to show you that there can be that pattern, there can be a great result, and I'm glad that certain things have gotten to the forefront where you can talk about them openly. As you mentioned, mental health, ADHD, you just kind of look at things differently.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's a burden as well. I'm not saying it's like, "Oh, this is great," because it does cause problem in relationships and areas like that. But in the zone where it does work, it's a great advantage and and a gift in a way.
Thanks, Don, for sharing all that. Um, how did you come up with how to write winners and losers? How did you structure it, Don? How did for the path that you wanted to take the reader down? What did you lay out for them in terms of the chapters? How was it organized?
Well, it's interesting. When they put me on this project, me and my friends and colleagues, and then with Mark Levy's driving me into this, I thought, if we're going to do this, we have to take an entirely different approach than all the other entrepreneur books, and we have to start looking at this differently. And I remember an old quote from Tacitus, with "The desire for safety stands against every great and noble enterprise." And I'm like, if we all want to be safe, we're not making any progress anywhere. So I thought we have to start off with the bad news. In other words, we got all this, great hype out there, and we think it's sexy and everything else, but in the end, it sucks. Because you're going up to you're going up in an area where you're going to have risk and you're going to have failure. And if you're not ready for it, don't do it, because you have to be a little crazy to get through that. Because people think, well, I'm going to have the freedom to work when I want. I'm like, yeah, you're going to be working 18 hours a day. So
Yeah.
there goes your freedom.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I don't want to have a boss anymore. I'm like, you know what? You're going to have 100 bosses. They're called customers. You're going to be
Absolutely.
overwhelmed with bosses. And, so it's a lot of these myths that are out there. Well, I want tons of money. And like, well, until 80% of your cash is going to go to employees, distribution, marketing, sales, rent, utilities, lawyers, accountants. I mean, going and on and on. It's like all of a sudden it ain't all it's cracked up to be. But I thought with that, we can then, for entrepreneurs that are really ready, we can then get into, okay, here's how you do it. And because entrepreneurs, in fact, I have it in the book, it's like entrepreneurs are cursed. It's like a curse for a lot of the reasons we already talked about. So I wanted to take a look at that so we can accept who we are and not try to avoid it and ignore it. And maybe even realize, maybe it's not for me. I don't know if I'm ready to take that level of risk. But with that, it was easy to flow into this power of losing, which was really the main chapter, once we set up that context, because I thought until we get that out of the way, it's going to be hard to talk about winning. And this is, and I had a lot of interviews with a lot of CEOs that were, geez, how you're so successful. How'd you do it? And they're like, you have no idea the pain we went through.
Mm.
Some people lost their marriages, their kids. Some people put them through through hell. I mean, my kids can tell you, yeah, it wasn't always a cakewalk. But it was there when we started looking at the autopsies of dead companies, and what happened is they couldn't adjust, they couldn't deal with risk, they couldn't adapt, and then I referenced a lot of really brilliant people that I knew, or I appreciate their research in this. So when we're able to embrace failure and quit avoiding it, we start waking up. Like it's not something we need to ignore or avoid, but something we need to embrace, because a lot happens in that moment of failure, and that really sets the stage for the book, because then we're able to get started and look at some of the some of the rules, the rules for losing.
Don, what's been your relationship with failure? And I don't necessarily mean how often has it happened, what was it that happened, but how has the way that you viewed failure evolved since you started thinking about failure, maybe as a young professional, maybe as a seasoned professional or professor, whatever it may be? What are your thoughts on failure?
Well, it sucks. I mean, it's not a pleasant experience when you put your heart and soul into something, and then all of a sudden you get cast down. But my relationship was like, every time that happened, something greater emerged next. And it could be a project that I was hoping would work and it didn't, and I
Mm.
had to adjust from that. My son, he just graduated last week from Penn State, and he went through a heck of a time with just interviewing and finding something in finance, which was his major, his passion is in finance. And I kept saying, just keep getting back up, keep going. The doors that are closing aren't the doors you needed to go through. There was another door
Yeah.
somewhere, and he just landed a great job on Wall Street with one of the top two financial firms. So he's walking on air right now. But I think with us, I think if we can embrace that, and I don't do it right all the time, and there's times where I'm just,
Oh
I
yeah, yeah, yeah,
ruminate.
yeah.
It's just, I'm like, God, what the heck was, what was going through that? I mean, geez, I had a failed marriage, and ended up losing everything that I had worked for. So that wakes you up in the morning, like, what the hell just happened? But from it, became more self-aware. I became better in selecting, relationships. I became better at knowing how to keep going. It's like, well, my life is about teaching. I'm not going to give that up. No matter what happens, I'm just going to keep learning and teaching. So, um, sadly, I'm learning a lot of what I wish I had known when I was 18 years old.
What are you going to do though? I mean, if you had learned it when you were that young, life would have been boring.
I mean,
What do
maybe.
you? Yeah, or no, or am I just bullshitting you? I mean, wouldn't it have been if you had it all figured out then? It's kind of like, I don't know. There's a chaos to life that, in hindsight, once you've been through it, not when you're going
Mm.
through it necessarily, but there's a beauty to the chaos once you've gone through it. Um, where I think, like, if you had sorted it all out when you were so young, like, what would your life have been? What, perfection? Without obstacles, without challenge, you would have been fucking bored.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Probably.
true.
I'm
It's
just, who knows? Who knows?
I yeah, I might have been bored, and, but I know I could have, avoided some disasters,
Yeah,
especially knowing more now about myself and how I may I probably crushed some relationships I shouldn't have. I probably, may have done some damage I shouldn't have, and that's an area where you don't know. You're young, you make stupid mistakes.
yeah. But here's the thing, like, even those, and it's not to say, listen, whatever relationship that was that broke, it's not to say they deserved it or anything like that. But even if you had figured out early in life how to avoid those failures, your son maybe wouldn't be getting that job he's getting on Wall Street.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? It's like these little pivot points, these little fractures in your timeline. So
Yeah.
it's something that's come up in this series where, do we prefer it now as it is now, where there was some chaos or order? But yeah, I mean, you could talk about that for days, just because the opportunities, the possibilities of different paths is just innumerable.
Yeah, it really is. And when you look at entrepreneurs in general, it is a series of failures, as I mentioned earlier. And when I was doing this research, I realized that, yeah, you're right. I mean, these failures is what strengthens us. Life's not boring, and it's in the challenge of getting back up again. That just, I think it's something you can't teach, which is wisdom.
Mm. Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's why you go to school. I have a few degrees, you have a few degrees. I mean, once you step out the doors, it doesn't mean because somebody handed you a paper, doesn't mean you have everything figured out. You still have to put all that into action, into
Mhm.
learning, into that wisdom. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you
Yeah.
for mentioning wisdom. Yeah. Don, so just briefly, so the rest of the book, what does that path look like for your reader?
Well, once we get the power of losing out, then it's easier to get into, okay, let's go, and let's start dispelling some of the myths of entrepreneurship, because now we can start destroying some things. and yeah, and like some of the myths, like we talked about, people don't follow you; they follow the story you represent. So um, so we look at that, and the myth of, like, well, you got to have a plan and work the plan. Well, that's crap, because when I was helping Admiral Moore transform fleet warfare for the U.S. Navy, I learned a lot from the military, and it's like, no plan's going to survive the first shot. No plan survives reality. Like that great management guru Mike Tyson said, right?
I was just about to mention his quote about getting punched in the face.
Right, exactly. One of the most famous quotes. It's like so accurate.
Yeah.
And when I was
Everybody has it. What is it, Don? Everybody has a
everybody has a
plan
plan. Yes.
until you get punched in the face. Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah, and so that's the key. And when I was working with Black Hawk Down, Matt Eversman, who's the key character in the book and the movie, I was working with him for about a year to learn more about what was happening in Black Hawk Down, and he said something interesting. He says, you got a plan, but the enemy has a vote on your plan, and they may vote no. So it was like, yeah, good point. So the issue of working your plan is really more about adapting than anything else. And
Absolutely.
we talk about myths of perseverance. We talk about myths of happy employee. There's a big happy employee movement going on. We blow that out of the water. We talk about being the lead dog. Really? Do you, you think that's the best spot? You think everybody that says you got to be the lead dog never ran a dog team. And I've run dog teams almost every year for fun, and they have no idea what the lead dog's got the suckiest position.
Oh yeah, yeah. I can imagine. I can imagine.
So these are the things we get into. And then I think with that, entrepreneurs are ready, right? Because it's like we filtered it out, and we know we got to be a little crazy and be able to take risks. And we now have to lose powerfully. These are the myths that are going to get in our way. So now let's get out there and create winning. So at the end of all that, the losing and the mythologies, then let's go now create, a winning world. And I think that's where I take a little shift at the end of the book to say, look, you have to accept your role, that the world was created by entrepreneurs. You know what I mean? It's how do you think countries got started?
Absolutely.
How do you think companies, civilizations emerge? These are entrepreneurs doing this, and it was I think it was Guns, Germs, and Steel, the research done for that book, which was a great book. I won a Pulitzer. It's like it was the exchange of trade. It was mercantilism that allowed civilization to emerge. So it wasn't. He didn't conclude in his research that it was the politicians or the religious leaders or anything like that. No, it was business
Oh
people. It
yeah.
was entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
and that is what allows it to emerge. So I think, in a sense, we entrepreneurs have a specific role for creating a winning world, and we should accept that and don't forget it.
Yeah, I love that idea. Just the picture you just painted of, politics, religion, where it lands in relation to entrepreneurship and mercantilism, and it completely makes sense. You're operating comfortably, trying to sort out the politics and the religion because you have all these other things, the foundation sorted out, how you're surviving day to day, the food, the textile, whatever it may be, that economic foundation of society. So that's a great picture to paint. Um, Don, I'm curious, in writing the book, was there anything that changed in you? Did your ideas evolve in some capacity, in some way? Did your thinking strengthen in one area or direction or another? How did things change in you in writing and getting this book out there?
I don't know. I think if anything, I don't think anything changed. I think it helped magnify
Okay.
some stuff, because when I've trained over 30,000 CEOs, and a third to a half are entrepreneurs. So for me, in doing the book, I was able to crystallize some elements that and themes that I've been seeing for the past 20 years, 25 years. And so that allowed me to magnify it more, which was great because you kind of know something's there, but until you can shrink wrap it and put it on a package and say, no, here it is, it helps you focus more. So for me, I think the issue was it led me to focus more on it. And I think when I'm working with, let's say, new CEOs coming online, if they don't have what it takes to take those levels of risks, then that's a different coaching session than if they do.
Yeah. And what's next for your writing, Don?
It's a good question. There's a dozen different areas out there, but people were saying, with the winners and losers can be applied to different areas. Like maybe there should be one for CEOs who are running, major companies. Maybe there should be one for relationships.
Mm,
Maybe, you know what I mean? So there's different categories we're looking at now to say, okay, that sounds good. Let's because the book just came out, but once we're able to go to the next level, I think it may be another theme because when you think about it, we're humans. we like winning, and I think that's where I have a problem with the happy employee movement because we're trying to make employees happy, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of dead companies that had happy employees, and because to really win, sometimes it takes a couple things we don't teach in our business schools: suffering, sacrifice, and that's what you need. You need people around you who are willing to suffer and sacrifice with you, and if not, then you're alone. Because what I found out that really makes people happy, it's winning. That makes a
Mm.
happy employee, being in a winning company. And we know that. I mean, geez, we know it in sports, we know it in everything else in our life, but for some reason we forget all this when we go into business.
Yeah, you got me thinking about what it means for employees, what it means for their happiness, satisfaction, fulfillment, whatever it may be. There's just so many options. People are just so different depending on where they are in the world, depending on where they are in the country. So I think that's why I find it fascinating that you've studied all these different areas and societies and cultures and groups. Just because you can't pinpoint it, you really can't pinpoint what's going to drive someone to do better. And the pandemic has just shown that. Again, you said there's that happy movement, but there's just that self-assessment for employees. What do I want? What do I want out of my career? What do I want out of life? I think it was a wake-up call, but I think it's one of those things where something traumatic happens, everybody's more alert, everybody's more attentive, and then it kind of just fades away. I think people have fallen back into their old practices. Um, what do you take away, Don, from the pandemic and just society and organizations? I mean, what did you see? What do you view that as? Do you think there is going to be a real change moving forward? Or do you think we fall back into our old ways? And I'm
I
not
think
holding you to any response. I'm just very curious. That's all.
no, I think it was as with any crisis. Was it Churchill? Let's not waste a crisis or something. I think it was an accelerator of a lot of technology. I mean, we moved the science of vaccine research into I mean, probably 10, 20 years faster. We now know a lot more than we did then. I mean, now we can codify genetic factors in a virus within days and then have a vaccine cranking out with weeks after that. So it's been an interesting accelerator, but for business, it's been an accelerator too because we've learned how to like work remotely. We've learned how to use our technologies differently. Um, I mean, I've had a lot of CEOs come up and say, "Well, geez, how do I keep an aligned culture when we're all no longer at the office?" And I say, "Well, keep doing what you've been doing for 5,000 years. We've been remote all the time. We've had remote religions and military operations. I mean, we've been remote for a while. Like, why is this so different?" And then we get into tribal, how to do that using tribal grouping behaviors. But so I think it accelerated us, and in the end, there'll be some good things out of it. Some people have left jobs they were miserable at, and now they can work for another company on the other side of the country, or
Yeah.
you know.
Don, I don't know. I mean, I've asked you so many questions. I don't know if I've asked you this one. So what is your, again, not holding you to a response. I know it can change with time, but what's your biggest takeaway in connecting all that work you've done around the world to how things are now? Just in general, pandemic aside, obviously there have been a lot of tense moments in the country, around the world. Like, yeah, just your thoughts in general. Again, not holding you to anything. I'm not asking you to solve everything, but what are your thoughts just on global relations, the way we live, the way we work, just a 30,000-foot level? Just your insights, if you could.
I think humans are an interesting species. It's my favorite species. I,
Mine
I have
too.
some
Mine
friends
too.
who are humans, and when you see what's going on in the world, it all makes sense when you look at us as a species and how we've evolved. I mean, warfare. We're still doing it. We still haven't grown up. We still haven't evolved. from that. I think so as an observer, it makes sense and it can be explained. Um, but my hope is that by learning, we can get more brilliant instead of just reacting to almost embarrassing issues. It's sometimes like, guys, come on, haven't we gone farther than that? I mean, it's and so personally, I do get embarrassed. Like, come on, let's stop. Um, yeah, and I think in a way we if we get too isolated from reality, we start having problems. Empires decline when that happens. And so I think that the thing is to keep us in touch with, what's really going on. Like when my kids got older, I started taking them around the world with me in these treks because I thought, you have to see what's not on CNN. You have to see what
Yeah.
American journalists will not report, or maybe they never bothered showing up. And they did. I said, because that's, this is the world. You want to know what's going on? Go there, ask questions, see the people. And I think if we did more of that, we'd get less hooked into the tirade of the moment. So
Yeah. Agreed. Um, Don, in wrapping up, I'm just curious, what book has inspired you? Obviously, this particular episode is about your book, but what if I had invited you back on to talk about a book that's really left an impact on you? Which book would that be, do you think?
it's interesting because as I went through to look at what I've been reading, a lot of it are journal articles. Like a lot of the research is literature research, and I see something fascinating, and then I follow up more, or I call the scientist, and we start talking, and I learn more from that. So it's really a series uh, of of these articles which teach me more. It's because a lot of times in the areas of research, by the time it makes it to a book form, it's already too
Yeah.
late.
Yeah.
It's already
Yeah.
like, because books take a couple of years just to roll it out. So I can think of different types of papers that came out to help me look at things differently. Like, when Mike Beer published, why change programs don't produce change, it was like, wow, most management theories fail, and that was in the early days. And Henry Mintzberg, great stuff out of McGill University. I mean, I can go on and on. Right now, one of my friends that I'm really privileged that we connect with, George Stalk. I mean, he wrote "Competing Against Time," brought the lean manufacturing revolution in the United States. He's written a number of Harvard Business Review articles on like disruption, and so we're talking next week to look at doing some more stuff together. It's just I think so. It's not as much of a book as the conversations around me, that I just am just fortunate that I've run into brilliant people. And so, reading their literature, or having a drink with them is more valuable for me.
That's amazing. Um, so Don, is there anything else that you want to share? Anything that you're up to these days? Anything that you want people to tune into, whether it's what you're doing on social media, your writing, anything at all that you want to share with this audience?
Well, I'm having some fun busting myths. That was one of the things that came out of some of the work I was doing with Mark. And so on my blog, I'm actually taking popular management myths that we've had for years and blowing them apart. But people can go, like, if you want to follow my crazy life and what we're doing, Saga Leadership, just as you see on the screen there, is really where we're putting things in place. The next step is we're looking at joining up with the Pacific Institute. And that's fascinating because I didn't know about them. But, when you look at like words like mindset, or mindsetting, or find your why, that was started by Lou Tice 50 years ago, half a century ago. This guy was
Mm,
finding this stuff. So he's died, and we're now looking at linking up because my research has paralleled his. So that's going to be fun. So stay tuned for the Pacific Institute. I'm going to do some more work and promotion, and joining up with them, just to lock arms, to accelerate what we're doing here.
yeah, keep blowing it up, Don. Um,
Thanks.
Only because I have a newfound appreciation for, not having the answers or going from thinking you have the answer to now you don't because the theory or
Mhm.
the myth has been blown up. I think it keeps us awake to reality and we don't become too complacent. We don't become too comfortable in what's out there.
Mhm.
Because I think we tend to hide in what is accepted and not really make the effort to move beyond that. So I appreciate just the way you look at myths, and if there is something there to blow up, you go ahead and do it. So I appreciate that.
Thanks.
And Don, thank you for being here. And Don's book is Winners and Losers: Entrepreneurial Lessons from 30,000 CEOs on How to Come Out on Top. Thank you for being here for this conversation, Don.
Thanks for having me.
And if there's anything that I might have missed, there's so much to cover, limited on time. I can always drag people down rabbit holes with my questions. If there's anything that did stand out that I should have asked, please reach out to me. I'll reach out to Don, see if I can get a response or some insight based on what you provide. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.